Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com, and you have made it to the last video in the Getting Started with Hyper-V series, as far as trying to get started from the ground up. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch the series. I hope you found it useful if you're new to Hyper-V and are wanting to get started either in your production environment or in a lab situation. And if you know other administrators that would benefit from this, feel free to share the video. I'm all about trying to share the knowledge and share some best practices and such, or at least best practices as I understand them. Try to help make some better administrators out there. So this video is going to put everything together. We've done a lot of configuration on both client and Hyper-V host. We'll do a couple of more and then be able to start spinning up our VMs. So first I have the HyperV Manager open, and one thing to note if you've restarted your computer since the previous video as I did this VM, when you open HyperV Manager, your Hyper-V host might not immediately appear. That's because the Hyper-V Manager is reconnecting to the host. So give it 15 or 20 seconds and it should appear. If it happens to not, I have seen Hyper-V Manager forget that it had a connection. We can click Hyper-V Manager, click connect to server, and repeat steps that we've done in previous videos to be able to connect to your host. So we're on the Hyper-V host, and we're simply going to go down the actions here of some things that we're going to need to do. Now, a lot of these settings you don't have to do, but I've had you set this up in a particular way, and so we're going to reflect these settings now. And one, if you remember, on our Hyper-V host, we made another drive. We made another partition and called it E. And the purpose of that's all the extra space outside of what the actual hypervisor itself needs. And that's where we're going to be storing the virtual hard disks and the virtual machines themselves. The virtual machine itself really is just configuration files that indicate how much RAM it has, what generation of VM it is, and so on. And so we made that separate drive. So what we want to do is set the defaults in Hyper-V Manager to point to these things that we've created. So to do that, we're going to click Hyper-V Settings under Actions, and for the Hyper-V host. And first, for virtual hard disks, you see the default path here. Note this C users public. This does not refer to your C drive on your machine. This is on the actual Hyper-V host. So we'll click Browse. If you want, you can just type the path in there, but I want to show you in Windows Explorer what this will look like. You might not see your drives under Hyper-V host, and if that's the case, you can click the drill down arrow here to see your drives. We're going to select E and select VHDs, then click Select Folder. And you see that the path is now changed to eVHDs. Also notice that the setting is now bold. This is something I really like with Hyper-V Manager, is if you have a setting that you have changed, and not just changed from default, but changed at all, and it has not been applied yet, this will be in bold. So it kind of gives you a reminder. For the virtual machines, we're going to choose Browse, E, and VMs. Click Apply. And notice those are now no longer in bold. The change has been applied, and we'll click OK. Now, the next thing we're going to do is make a virtual switch. This is not necessarily required to make a VM. However, if you want the VM to connect to anything such as other VMs or the rest of your network or the internet, you're going to need a virtual switch. Now, this is my pet peeve of Hyper-V Manager. So I'm going to click Virtual Switch Manager, and we're going to make an external switch. I have another video out there that gives a little bit of explanation between the different types of switches. I'll link that in the description. We're going to choose external switch, create virtual switch. We'd give it a name. We're just going to keep this as is for right now. And for an external switch, we need to have that bound to a physical NIC on your hypervisor, because this external switch is going to be using that NIC to pass traffic to the rest of or to pass traffic to the network that the physical Hyper-V host is on. So these are our options. I happen to have two NICs on this server, and with these descriptions, I have no idea which NIC that I want to use. Now, if I have a single NIC, then this is easy. But when you have two, this can be a challenge. This is usually based off of the interface description, but something that we're going to see is that there's actually a difference, and I'm not quite sure why that is. This environment that I'm creating here is actually the first that I've seen where the descriptions here will not match what we're about to see. But regardless, we have ambiguity, and I don't like dealing in ambiguity with configuration, especially if this is a production environment. You don't want to pick a NIC and then go, hey, did it break? That's not a good idea. So we're going to add some precision to this. If you do have the single NIC though, that will be the only option that you have. And what you'll want to do is make sure this allow management operating system to share this network adapter to be checked. What this is going to allow is for the host itself to be able to pass traffic over this network adapter rather than it just being used for the virtual switch for your VMs. You're going to want that for your host if you want to do Windows updates or have this host somehow having a connection to the rest of your network. If you have multiple NICs, and like I do, and you want to have a NIC just dedicated to your virtual machines, there's no need to check this allow management operating system to share the network adapter. One thing to note though is if you have this checked and you click apply, it's going to break the network connection for a couple of minutes or so. This is completely normal, and actually you'll get a little warning saying, hey, this is going to disrupt the network. That's fine. After about a minute or so, you'll see the little apply changes seem like it's going forever. The network connection will be reestablished, and your switch is going to be there. For SRIOV, that's beyond the scope of this video. So for right now, we're going to keep that unchecked. If you happen to have a NIC that supports it, you can do a little bit of research on SRIOV and see how it could be beneficial for you. But since we have ambiguity between which NIC to use, we're not going to use the GUI to make this virtual switch. We're going to do it via PowerShell, which is not nearly as intimidating as it sounds. I'm going to walk you through the steps. So we're going to click cancel, and we're going to open PowerShell. I like to do the right click the Windows Start menu or Start button method and clicking PowerShell. And we have our PowerShell window here. The first thing I'm going to do is make me a variable for credentials. And the reason why we're doing this is we're going to be using these credentials a couple of times, and it just saves from having to retype it. And if you're typing in a hurry, you might misspell the password for the credential you're using, and it just causes frustration. So we're going to do $. I'm going to call it cred for credential. Space equals space, and then we're going to type get credential, and press enter. What this will do is bring up a window that's asking for some Windows credentials, and we're going to put in Hyper-V host. You can see the completion there. I've done this a couple of times to make sure everything's going to work for us. And administrator. This is actually the same as what you did when you connected to the Hyper-V host in HyperV Manager. We'll put in our password. Now that's stored there. If you want to have proof that it's there, just type the $cred, press enter, and you'll see the username. For password, it has been encrypted, so that's why you see system.security.securestring rather than the password in plain text. So, as with everything, there are multiple ways of doing what we need to do. I'm going to show you this way. Will take a little bit longer, but I think it might be a little bit less intimidating if you're new to PowerShell with this. And what we're going to do is enter a PowerShell session on our Hyper-V host. And so what we type in the window is literally going to be commands that are going to be happening on the host itself. So to do that, I'm going to do enter PS session, and you can use tab completion there, dash computer name, and that's going to be Hyper-V host dash credential, and this is the credential that we've stored in cred. And it'll take just a moment or so, and then we'll connect into our Hyper-V host. When we did that enable PS remoting earlier, that's allowing us to be able to do this. And if you're worried about I'm running commands over something I don't know what it is, when you're in a remote PowerShell session, you will see the name of the computer that you're connected to. So that'll give you a little peace of mind. I'm going to change directories to the C drive. I'm going to use a little shortcut for that, and the reason being I want a little bit more real estate for my commands. So I'm going to do CD C, and first I'm going to do get net adapter. And this is going to return the physical NICs that are on the computer, and you see I have two. They have a friendly name, Ethernet, and Ethernet space 2. I personally hate spaces with stuff, but this is what's done by Windows. You have this interface description that probably looks familiar to you. Interface index, you'll probably remember that from some of the early configurations of the Hyper-V host. Status, and this status up tells us that this is the NIC that we're using right now. I'm going to go back to HyperV Manager and just show you the discrepancy there. This, I'm fairly positive, comes from interface description, but for whatever reason it's different. Probably there's some difference in the registry keys that are associated with the NIC, but again, we have ambiguity, and so we're going to solve that. So what we're going to do is make our virtual switch using PowerShell. This is super easy to do. To make this happen, PowerShell uses this idea of verb dash whatever the thing is that you're wanting to do. So we're wanting to make a new, make sure I get focused back in this window. There we go. New VM switch. We're going to give it a name. So dash name. We're going to call this external switch. We're going to tell it what network adapter to use. So net adapter, and if you tab complete, it'll be net adapter name. You can also use the interface description as well. I personally like using net adapter name. Ethernet 2 is the one that has this in the up status, and since there's a space, we have to use quotation marks. So Ethernet space 2. And since this is the only NIC that I'm using right now, we're going to allow the management OS or the hypervisor to be able to use it. So dash, and you can tab complete. I'm going to do allow, then press tab. This accepts a Boolean value, so that's going to be true or false. So we'll do $true and press enter. Now, as I said before, when you have that allow management OS ticked, the connection to Hyper-V Manager is going to be broken for a minute or so. That is also true when doing this with PowerShell. And what's going to happen here, it'll take a couple of minutes to do its thing. You'll actually get a warning saying, hey, the network connection has been interrupted, and then it'll say, you know, trying to retry for the next 4 minutes, and then it will be the connection will be reestablished. You will not see any of those warnings until after the connection has been reestablished. So now, granted, you might see the warnings. Every test I've done in this environment so far, I see the warnings after the connection has been reestablished. So I think that's kind of funny. Anyway, while this is working, I am going to show you that I have downloaded an ISO file. And I downloaded the net install version of Fedora Server. You do not have to have an ISO file immediately to make a virtual machine, and I'm going to show you the option that you would choose in just a moment. That does not require it, but I went ahead and downloaded this just to have a ISO available for us to be able to use. So there, you probably saw the little flash up there talking about the reconnection. There's our warnings. Now we have an external switch. If you want to see proof positive there, get VM switch, and it's going to return the same information. Notice the interface description. I'm not quite sure why that is the way it is, but you know for a fact that we told it to use Ethernet space 2 as the net adapter for the VM switch. You can also confirm that your host still has network connectivity. I'm going to ping google.com here, and the ping is going to be successful. While we're in this remote session, we're going to alter the Windows firewall just a bit. And the reason being is we're going to need a way to get this ISO file from our local machine, or in this case, the test client VM that I have, to the Hyper-V host. If you have some experience with Windows administration, you probably heard my cat hopping off my printer that's beside my computer. But if you have any experience with Windows administration, you've probably heard about administrative shares, and those are off by default in Server Core. I know for a fact this is true for Server 2019. I think it is true for Server 2016 as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. This is not a bug. It's not a problem. It's actually a good thing, because you generally don't want traffic accepted on a server unless you have explicitly said we are offering this particular service. And what your administrative shares work off of is something called SMB, or server message block. So what we're going to need to do is tell our Hyper-V host to allow traffic, or allow server message block traffic to be able to get the ISO there. And then we're going to disallow the SMB traffic, because you don't want to keep that open all the time. You might think, oh, that's a pain. Well, you're probably not going to be putting a whole lot of ISOs on this. You'll probably have a couple that you're using over and over, so it's not something you have to do often. There are other ways of getting ISOs on this. You can use like Invoke web request, similar to curl if you have some Linux experience, to be able to download ISOs using a full web address for said ISO. But for this particular demonstration, we're going to use the administrative shares. So to make this happen, we're going to get net firewall rule, if I spell that correctly, not address filter, get net firewall rule. We're going to give it a name. The beauty of the name parameter is that it accepts wildcards. Now, if you're not sure what rule to use, you could use just get net firewall rule, and it'll give you a ton of information. I already know have researched beforehand the rules that I want, and we want the FPS, which stands for File and Print Services, SMB, and then star. There are two rules here. There's a rule for traffic coming in and a traffic going out. So FPS-SMB star will catch both of the rules. We're going to pipe that, and the pipe key should be above your enter key on your keyboard. So shift and that key gives you the vertical pipe. And we're going to choose enable net firewall rule, tab completion there. And I'm going to use verbose just to where we see some output with it. And you'll see that these have now been enabled. If you want to verify that, I'm going to press the up arrow to show the same command. And we're going to do select name and enabled. And that will show you the name of the firewall rule and the fact that they're enabled. So at this point, we're now ready to be able to put the ISO onto our Hyper-V host and make our virtual machine. So I'm going to type exit to get out of this particular session. And so now we're back on our actual computer. So if I do host name, we see it's test client. So we're out of the Hyper-V host and we're back on our regular computer. So the question still remains, how do we get the ISO on there? I like using PowerShell drives or PS drives, simply because it makes this look like I have a little, I guess maybe fake hard drive is a way to look at it that's connected to our Hyper-V host. So to make this, we're going to do new PS drive. We're going to give it a name, and I usually name my PS drives by the host name. So Hyper-V host. The root of the drive is going to be the administrative share. So I'm going to do whack, and whack refers to 2 backslashes. Hyper-V host \E $. The administrative shares have that $sign at the end. We need to do PS provider, which if you don't provide this, the command will ask you for it, and the provider we're using is file system. Lastly, we need credentials, and since we had our we made our cred variable earlier, and we know that it worked because we were able to do the remote PowerShell session, we can reuse it. And so now I have a drive on my computer that is named Hyper-V host. So I could do get child item Hyper-V host. And we see our 3 folders that are on the E drive, which is really kind of nifty. So now what we need to do is copy that ISO file from our computer to the drive that's on the Hyper-V host. So to do that, we'll do copy item, path. This is going to be C, and we can use some tab completion here. Users. Name of my user is local admin. It's in the downloads folder. And starts with an F, because it's Fedora. Destination. Now we can do Hyper-V host / and then we know the folder that we want to put this in is called ISOs. We press enter. And depending on the size of the file, this might take some time. The net install ISO file is pretty small and it's already done. And so if you want to verify that it's there, we can do get child item again, Hyper-V host, ISOs, and we see that in that directory, notice the directory has changed to being the list of the actual share, and our server net install is there. So now we have all the pieces we need. So let's get to making a VM. So we're back in our Hyper-V Manager. Click New, Virtual Machine. Give you some information at the before you begin. We'll click Next. I'm going to give this a name. We're going to call it Fedora Test. Notice how it talks about where the actual virtual machine configuration will be stored, and the default location is now EVMs, which before it was like C program data, on and on and on. And if you want to store it in a different place, you can check this box and choose a different location. We're going to put it in EVMs. Generation. Choose generation 2. If you have a compatibility issue that requires gen 1, do that, but if you're not sure which one to pick, go ahead and pick generation 2. Assign the memory. There's 32 gigabytes of memory that's on this this Hyper-V host, so I got plenty to work with. I'm actually going to give it way more than it needs, but that's because I can. I'm going to give it 4 gigs of memory, 4096 megabytes. I'm not going to choose dynamic memory simply because I want this VM to always have this amount of memory. For network, notice our external switch is now here. We made that within that PowerShell session. And for our hard disk, by default, Hyper-V Manager is going to name it after the VM itself. You can change this to whatever you want. The default location, notice it's EVHDs. You can put that anywhere that you would like. And for size, we don't need 127 gigabytes. We're going to give it 20. And that's actually more than it needs, but we'll be fine for this. If you already have a VHD, at this point you can attach that to the virtual machine, or you can make a VM without a hard drive and you'll attach it later. But we're going to just do it as a part of the creation process for the VM. For installation options, we can install an OS later, but since we have the ISO there, we're going to choose install an operating system from a bootable image file, and we're going to browse to eISOs, and there's our ISO file. My cat has jumped back up on the printer. You can probably hear him moving around there while he somehow gets comfortable on the printer. I've never figured out how that works. We'll click Next. We get a summary of what's happening. We click Finish. And yay, our virtual machine is made, but you might be wondering, why is it not listing here? Generally, I have to click refresh, and then it will appear. Sometimes I've seen it appear immediately, so if you don't see your VM, don't worry, it's going to appear there for you. So it's currently in the off state. I'm going to double click the VM, and that will open the console. You could also select the VM and click connect. We'll now click start. You can either click start here or the button. And I'm going to get my keyboard ready so I can tell it to boot from a disk. Connecting to Fedora Test. and we see an issue of start Pixie over IPv4. Boo, it didn't boot. Something that you will often see on a Linux machine, and you might be able to get past this with Fedora Test. I'm going to simply click turn off, which is the same as just yanking the power cord from it. So we have to tell it to not use secure boot. So I'm going to go into the VM settings itself. And we're going to go and disable secure boot. Notice firmware is booting from booting from the DVD drive, which is what we want. So I turn off the secure boot. You can also get to VM settings from here in the window. So I'll click connect. Famous last words in IT, it should work. So it'll start the virtual machine, and we will see the installer in just a moment. And there's our installer for Fedora 30. So I'm not going to test the media. I'm assuming that it's working. So install Fedora 30. And we're not going to go through the install of Fedora. However, this is our virtual machine that we now have running on our Hyper-V host that we're connecting to using HyperV Manager on our client machine. And from this point, sky's the limit. You can put more ISOs on your Hyper-V host, make as many virtual machines as you want, and just have a good time studying for cert exams or just messing around and learning new things. The last thing I want to do, if you remember, we opened the firewall up for the SMB server message block traffic. I want to close that. Now, we're not going to enter PowerShell session again. If you're wanting to do like a one-off command or so, you can do something called Invoke Command. And so we're back in our PowerShell window here. I'm going to do Invoke Command, tab complete. Computer name, we're going to do this command on the Hyper-V host. Credential, remember we made our variable earlier, and it's still valid because we kept this PowerShell session open. Credential. Now, I'm going to do script block. You don't have to do this this parameter. Instead, you can just use the little curly braces. But for this, I'm going to give you the full syntax. So we're basically going to do that same command as we did earlier as far as the firewall rule. So get net firewall rule name, and this is going to move on to the next line here, fps-smb star. We're going to pipe that to disable net firewall rule, and we're going to do verbose. We do a close curly brace and press enter. So what this does is a quick little connection. What did I do there? Get net firewall. I misspelled firewall. Those of you watching probably saw that and going, "This is going to fail" when he presses enter. And we'll get our verbose feedback, and then those rules are going to be gone. So we would not be able to connect back to our PS drive at this point. And if you wanted to clean up after yourself here, we can do get PS drive name Hyper-V host and do remove PS drive. Actually, it looks like it. Oh wait, did I misspell Hyper-V? Yes, I did. I cannot spell in this video today. And the drive is now gone. So we've cleaned up after ourselves as far as the firewall. We have our VM here if I wanted to get started with Fedora 30. And now you have a fully functioning Hyper-V host with a machine to be able to connect to it and manage your VMs. So I hope, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I hope you find this useful. Feel free to leave feedback on this and any other videos. If you have questions and such, I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. If you enjoyed the content, make sure that you click like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you can be aware of when new content comes out. Also, share it with folks if you think that they would benefit from it. Show them this video. And thanks again for watching, and I will see you the next time.